Hi everyone, it's Marisa from bumblebeeapothecary.com. Welcome back. Today I'd like to share with you a highly requested video on doing the GAPS diet with toddlers. I'm going to share you my personal tips and tricks from experience that I have had with my son on the GAPS diet. Going through the GAPS diet is not the easiest thing to do. That's true if you're an adult, or if you're a kid, or if you're a baby or toddler. And it seems like in that stage of being a toddler, it's extra hard just because they can't quite reason as much as an older child or an adult can. They can't oftentimes grasp why different things are the way that they are, and then throw into that mix a bunch of sensory issues and picky eating. You're pretty much set up for a challenge. So I'm here to share with you some things that I have figured out and that have been really helpful for me and my son as I've helped him go through the GAPS introduction diet. So I'm going to divide this video into kind of two sections. I'm going to be talking about younger toddlers / babies and then older toddlers. By younger toddlers, I'm going to mean a baby that's like 9-12 months up until about 24 months. And then for an older toddler, I'm going to be meaning like 2 to 3 years, somewhere around there, maybe 4, kind of depends. And of course there's going to be kind of overlap between those two age ranges, but that's what I'm meaning. I have done the GAPS introduction diet with my son during both of those stages. I'll really quickly just give a little backstory on why that is. So we did the GAPS introduction diet the first time, which I've talked about in another video, which I'll link below, to reset his gut after we started introducing some other non-GAPS foods and found out that he was not ready for those. So we did it then when he was 18 months old. And then he stuck to the GAPS diet all that time until just recently he went through potty training and we did more sweet treats than he had usually been having. And we thought it had been enough time that maybe he would be able to handle it okay, but it turns out he was not ready and we saw some symptoms coming back. And so just to reset his gut again and get him back on the right track, we are going through the GAPS introduction diet with him a second time. He is almost 3. He will be 3 in March. And at this point, he is almost done with the introduction diet. He's kind of in stage 5 right now. Fruit, he's not quite ready to add, but he's doing well with everything else. So there is a big difference doing the introduction diet with toddlers in those two different age groups. With the younger group, you have more control. They have kind of less opinions developed at that point. They can't quite express so many different complaints and things. It's a little bit easier in that way. When they're older, it gets to be a little bit more challenging because by that point they can express themselves more, they can have all kinds of complaints and opinions about what's going on and what they think and what they want or don't want, and so that makes it a little bit harder. Also, as you're working through the GAPS introduction diet with a young child, even though there's lots of things about this that are challenging, try also to keep the big picture in mind. The amount of time spent on the entire GAPS diet for this age is typically 2 years, and while you're in the midst of it, that can seem like kind of a long time, but when you are done with it, looking back, it is actually such a small amount of a person's life. When you are doing the GAPS diet, you are healing whatever health issue that you're trying to heal, and that means that when you are done, your child is not going to have to struggle like they would have if they had not done the GAPS diet. For example, if you're doing it for food allergies, food sensitivities, imagine them going through the rest of their life having to avoid certain foods and not being able to eat a wide variety of foods or whatever they want. It is such a better way to live, being able to be healed from these things and have a life of freedom and ability rather than being restricted by different physical and mental health problems. So try to keep that in mind. Also, that this age range that you're doing it with, a toddler, in that perspective is actually easier than if you were to be trying to do the GAPS diet with someone who was much older, an older child, perhaps school-aged, or even a teenager. They're going to be even harder in many ways to be able to accomplish the GAPS diet with, just because they have more freedom. You have quite a bit less control over what they're eating. So be thankful that you have this time with your child when they're this young to be able to get this healing done now while their bodies are very young and can heal the quickest and the deepest. Be thankful for that and just keep that big picture in mind of what you're doing at this age and the positives of it, how it is so much more doable when they're young and little and so much under your care versus when they get older. In any case, it's not easy to be doing this with a toddler of any age, so let's jump into the tips. So let's start with the babies / younger toddlers age group. With this age, you can do a lot of spoon feeding to them. A lot of the foods that you start off with in the very beginning stages of the GAPS introduction diet are things like the meat stock and more pureed foods, and oftentimes you're gonna get that into them more if you're sitting down and spoon feeding them. And I know that that takes a lot of time, but it's worth it. It's so worth it to just do it right and get that good food into them. So go ahead and spend the time, sit down with them. As you're able, you can also try giving little pieces of food that they can pick up on their tray if they enjoy doing that, but plan on spending time feeding them actively so you're making sure that they're eating what they need. The meat stock can be a tricky one. Oftentimes they're not so excited about eating or drinking that at first, but you just have to keep at it, keep on trying multiple times a day, every day, like Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride recommends in the introduction diet. You're having it 3 times a day with every meal and then also in between meals. So just try it 6 times a day, keep on offering it. Pretty soon they're gonna have it, and then you'll see that as they start to get used to it, they will enjoy it and they'll actually want it and ask for it. For the meat stock, you can try offering it to them in different forms too. Sometimes they'll do best having it spoon-fed into their mouth. Sometimes they will drink it from a sippy cup. So try different ways and see what they like, see what they'll accept, and always switch it up as time goes on too. Don't stop offering one just because they refused it once. If they didn't like it in a sippy cup at first, chances are down the road then they will. So just keep these things in mind of offering it in different ways. I really like these Life Factory glass sippy cups. That way you can put warm liquids into them and they're a nice safe material that's glass, and you don't have to worry about toxic chemicals from plastics. And then they have the silicone wrapping on them. What I would oftentimes do is to put meat stock in there, and then you can set it in a pan of water. It's already got this nice protective thing on it to keep the glass from being in contact with the pan, so it's an easy way to just warm up the meat stock and give it to them. Another thing that's really helpful for this younger age, and it can be for the older age too, but especially I know for us, for that younger toddler age, are these silicone squeezies. You can do meat stock and pureed vegetables and meat in here. You can also do yogurt once that's introduced, and if that's something that they're doing well with. I did this a lot when my son was doing it the first time. I would give him this as a snack, just plain raw milk 24-hour cultured yogurt in one of these, and it was great. He can carry it around. They have an insert, a silicone insert in the lid so that they have to suck on it to get it out so it's not messy around the house or in the car. So these were very helpful. I will link these exact products below in the description box if you want to find them too. One thing that can be really helpful is to find a food that they like from the allowed foods on the beginning of the introduction diet and mix other things into that they maybe are not quite so excited about. Start with a small amount and then kind of work up. This first time through the GAPS introduction diet with my son, we did this a lot. He really liked squash, so I would cook a lot of butternut squash, and in the beginning when he wasn't so excited about the meat stock, I would mix some of that into the squash and then give that to him, and that worked really well to be able to get meat stock in him while he wasn't quite so excited about it, but he enjoyed it because he couldn't tell it was mixed in the squash. You can gradually increase it until he's getting more, and then by that time they should start be accepting it and kind of enjoying it even on its own. You can also use this trick to get fats or fermented foods into them that they may not be quite enjoying yet on their own. So for example, you could mix a little bit of yogurt into the squash if you want to start giving that. That can be really handy. So find what they like and kind of use that to get other foods in as well. There's a really handy recipe that I have linked below for some veggie gummies. So they're cooked vegetable gummy bears, or you can do whatever shape you want, but that's a really nice snack for toddlers to have in the beginning stages. You can make it with some cooked vegetables and meat stock and gelatin, and then that's something that they can eat if you have to be out on the go that doesn't require keeping refrigerated or being heated up, and that can make things a lot easier. And then even at this young age, don't underestimate how much they understand. Go ahead and explain it to them in as much detail as you want. Just explain, we do this with my son. We just explain, we're doing this to make your tummy better so that you'll feel better and you can be healthier, and these are the foods that you're gonna eat and this is how they help you. Just explain it, talk to them, and I think that they do understand a lot more than we give them credit for. For the picky eating, we're gonna talk a little bit more later in this video about some of the whys behind why the picky eating happens, but for now, just keep in mind that you have to be firm, you have to be consistent, you have to get them over the hump of actually eating the foods that they need to heal. The reason why they're not enjoying these particular foods, or they're having a hard time with sensory processing problems and things like that, is because of that imbalance of the gut flora. And the only way that that's going to be fixed is for them to be able to be eating these foods. So you have to be firm, you have to be consistent. Eventually they will eat. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride says she does not believe that there's ever a hopeless situation. You just stay firm, stay consistent, and they will eat what they need to eat. She says, where there is a will, there is a way. And I believe that. We'll talk a little bit more again about this at the end of the next section that I want to talk about, which is older toddlers. So especially with this age, use talking to them, explain to them what you're doing so that they know the whys behind it. I think that it really does help. And I do think that they understand more than we realize. So with this older toddler stage where you have less control, you can't just necessarily spoon feed everything into them as easily as you can when they're younger. You have to get a little bit more creative. We did a lot of things when he was first starting the GAPS introduction diet this time around, as far as making it fun, making it like a game, kind of taking the focus off of the food that we were dealing with and making it interesting. For example, to get him to have the meat stock, we would sit down on the couch with one of his favorite books or a few of his favorite books. He loves trucks. So we would get some truck books and we'd read the book together, and then every time that he turned the page, he would have to have a drink of meat stock or a bite of it if we were doing it with a spoon. And that worked great because he wasn't so crazy about drinking it, but he loved those books, and so he was so interested to get on to the next page that he would go ahead and just take his drink or his bite of the meat stock, and then we'd go on and read the book, and it made it really enjoyable. If you have somebody who's not so interested in books, then just get creative about what they are interested in. If it's little toys that you're playing a game with, or even if you have to use like a cartoon or a show that they're interested in. We like to limit screen time a lot in our house, and I think it's a good idea in general, but sometimes there are really times when that can be very helpful, and this might be one of them. So you can have the show playing, pause it, say, okay, it's time for your bite, and then they don't get to have the show turned back on until they take their bite or their drink of meat stock. Another thing that we do to kind of help the meat stock process be a little bit more fun and interesting is my son really enjoys it if you count the bites of meat stock. So as he's taking bites, 1 bite, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then so on. For some reason he loves that, and that was one of the ways that he got to actually enjoying meat stock to where he asks for it now. Some other things that you can try to help with introducing the meat stock and getting them to like it is kind of think outside the box. I know for us adults, meat stock would not be very appetizing when it's room temperature, but sometimes I know my son enjoys having meat stock at room temperature. He actually prefers it that way rather than being heated up, and that's kind of nice because it saves me a step. I don't have to warm it up for him. So try that, just kind of experiment with things that you may not think of at first and see if they accept different things better at different temperatures. Make sure that as you're feeding them that you're offering a big enough variety. It might sound pretty restrictive when you're talking about like the first 1 to 3 stages of the GAPS diet, but if you think about it, all those different vegetables that are allowed and a bunch of different meats, there is a lot of variety. So use that to your advantage. Make sure that you're offering as much variety as you can and keep it interesting. That will also help you find the things that they are enjoying so that you can kind of maximize and use those to get in other foods that they're not enjoying quite as much at this point. I find that in general, during this time of the GAPS intro diet, that it's really helpful to just keep your home life calm and consistent and simple and structured. That really helps these children who tend to be the GAPSy kind of kids. I think oftentimes thrive on structure and knowing what's coming next and what's expected of them. They find boundaries and things very comforting, actually. And so it's good to keep everything as consistent as possible, say no to busy stuff and going too many places, and just kind of focus on staying at home and keeping everything nice and calm so that they are in the best state of mind to be able to work through this new time of eating these different foods. Try to say yes to them about things as often as you can. It can be really hard when they can't have foods that they were used to being able to eat. You have to be saying, no, we can't have that right now, but we can have this other food, and that's hard. And so saying yes to other things as much as you can, like do they want to go outside? Yes, let's do that. Just say yes as much as you can to other things, even though you have to say no sometimes to food, and just keep the food very strict. Another really big thing to keep in mind is that during this stage, they're probably going through die-off and detox. And of course, I talk about in other videos, which I'll link some of those below, about how to minimize this and be a little bit more comfortable during these stages. But you want to be compassionate. They probably genuinely do not feel good during this time. So do lots of extra holding them, snuggling them, just be compassionate, read lots of books, play with them, whatever they enjoy, do lots of that. Make sure they're getting a lot of sleep at night with an early bedtime, and just be really compassionate and understanding about that they might be not feeling so well as they're working through, especially those very first stages. Social activities can be kind of hard during this stage. The easiest thing during the introduction stage is to just kind of limit or avoid them for a little while. It'll be easier once they're on the full GAPS diet to be able to have GAPS legal treats and fruit and things like that. But for now, just try to limit that and try to take the focus when there are social things that you need to be a part of. Take the focus off of food so much and think more about fun activities to do. You can keep that in mind if there's like birthday parties that you need to plan and things like that. Make sure that they're getting enough carbs when they're eating. The GAPS diet, compared to the standard American diet, is pretty low carb. Now, it doesn't have to be. If you consciously try to make sure there's enough carrots and squash and things like that, then you can be getting a good amount of carbs. And for growing children, I think that is important, especially in these first stages, to make sure that they're having the squash and the carrots and peas even, so that they can keep up the carb amount. If they're going from the standard American diet, or at least eating a lot of fruit and things beforehand, to the GAPS introduction diet, that is a huge change, and the body's going to have a little bit of a hard time with that. You want to make sure that transition is as easy as possible, so just keep in mind to be keeping up the carbs. Also, feed them often enough. They're probably going to need a lot more than just 3 meals a day, so think about probably more like 6 meals a day. Break it up, make sure they're eating enough so that their blood sugar doesn't get low and they have trouble with that. At this age, you can let them help you cook. My son loves doing this. He eats a lot of scrambled eggs, so he's learned how to be safe to not touch the hot places on the stove, and he likes to help mix the raw eggs and then stir them once they're in the pan. He thinks that's really fun, so try to think of ways that you can kind of involve them in the food prep process. It can be hard when they transition onto the GAPS diet for you to realize, oh, they can't eat these certain things, and you might feel bad. Like, oh, he sees other people eating food sometimes and sees pictures of food, and he can't have some of these foods, and that can be hard. Keep in mind that it's possible that it's a lot harder on us than it is on them. So if you try to keep their environment free from being involved with other food as much as possible, that's helpful, but you can't 100% block it out. So just realize though that it may not bother them as much as you think. I know that for my son, he's used to it now and he doesn't really mind. He just knows, oh, bread is not something I can eat, and he doesn't mind if he sees his sister eating a piece of sourdough bread. It doesn't bother him at all. He just knows that that's the way it is. So I'm not saying this to brag like, oh, my son is so easy, because I wouldn't describe him as easy, for one thing, but I'm just saying this so that you can see of how far he's come. Like, this is where you can be. If they get used to eating a certain way, then they just kind of accept that, like, that's how it is for me. And we tell him, yeah, later on down the road, once your tummy is better, then you'll probably be able to have bread. And he's just like, okay. So it can be like that. And I know in the beginning it's way harder when they have to get used to that, but I'm just giving this to you as some hope so you can see that it does get easier. Like I mentioned before, keep the combination of being compassionate, because it's not the easiest thing. They might feel yucky in the beginning, but be firm, because this is the way that they're going to overcome the struggles that they have and get to feeling better. For even an older toddler, if them feeding themselves some food isn't working, try sitting down with them like you would a younger toddler and spoon feeding them. Oftentimes that's a good way just to get the food in them, get them started eating it, and oftentimes they'll realize, oh, okay, I actually do kind of like this, and I feel better now that I have food in me. So get creative and just try different things. Now let's talk for a little bit about what's going on inside of them that is causing the picky eating and the dislike of certain foods like meats and meat stock and things like that. It can be really helpful just to kind of understand the whys behind this. So eating challenges are very common in GAPS people. For one thing, they oftentimes have sensory processing disorders. So the imbalance of the gut flora leads to wrong messages in the brain, so food doesn't feel like it should in the mouth. It doesn't taste the way that it should, and it can make eating a pretty unpleasant experience. The candida overgrowth, which is really common in GAPS people, is something that will cause them to crave starchy foods or sweet foods, and so they have to break that habit, and some of that candida has to die off in order for those tastes to change. But in the beginning stages, that can be really hard because they're wanting to eat those foods that feed the pathogenic flora that they shouldn't be eating. And then oftentimes GAPS people have abnormal mouth flora too, as well as abnormal gut flora, and the abnormal mouth flora can make things feel weird and taste weird, and again make eating uncomfortable and unpleasant. But like Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride says, that the only way to make these situations better is to start healing that gut flora, restoring that healthy balance, and the only way that's going to happen is for them to change their eating, start eating these foods that bring about that balance of the healthy gut flora, heal that lining so that the gut-brain connection is happening properly and the sensory processing things can be made better. So we have to just be firm, gentle, compassionate, but firm in order to get them used to eating these new foods. One way that you can do this is, I kind of mentioned some of these things before, find things that they enjoy and use that as an incentive. If you have a GAPS child who's autistic, who isn't verbal, this can be really, really hard. This is probably the hardest situation, and Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride recommends using something like an old food that they enjoyed, like chips or cookies or something, crackers, as a reward. So you have them take a bite of the food, the new GAPS food, meat stock or meat or a cooked vegetable or something. They have to take a bite of that before they get a bite of the old food. You only do this as long as you have to. If you can switch to something else like a movie or a book or a toy or something else, then that's even better. But whatever it takes in the very first stages to get them taking bites of the new food, and gradually they'll learn, okay, I have to take this bite in order to get the bite of the other food, or to keep the movie to continue playing, or to read the rest of the book, or whatever it is that they want. Gradually you make it so that they have to have 2 bites of the good food before they get their reward, and then 3 bites. As quickly as you can, try to switch from using the old non-GAPS food to other types of rewards. But hopefully you kind of see what I'm getting at, type of a behavior modification type of a situation to get these kind of kids who really need this healing started eating the good foods even though they do not want to at all. They just have to learn, if you want this reward, then you have to work for it by taking bites of this food. She says ignore tantrums, ignore screaming, do not give in to any of that. Be firm, be kind but firm, and super, super consistent, and you will get there. She says, like I mentioned before, she does not believe in impossible situations. Where there's a will, there is a way. And just remember what you're doing for your child too, by helping them to heal in this way, is giving them, instead of a lifetime of health problems, and in the case of autism, disconnection from people and so many challenges, or even the other things that you can have when you're a GAPS person, dyslexia, depression, so many different things, eczema. By helping them to switch to these foods and heal their gut, you are setting them up for a much healthier life ahead of them. So just keep that in the forefront of your mind. Try also to surround yourself with positive people who are going to be understanding of what you're doing and compassionate and maybe there with you. Some great places for that are some GAPS Facebook groups. I have a Facebook group too called Traditional Health Wisdom, and there's like-minded people in there. I'll put some links to some of these places below if you don't have people in real life to surround yourself with during a time like this. Another place you can look for like-minded people is your local Weston A. Price chapter. But yeah, just stay compassionate and firm and you will get there. I tried to share all of the tips that I know, everything that's been helpful for me and my son, so I really hope that you found this helpful. If you have more questions or want more information on anything that I've talked about, be sure and leave me a comment below. Check out that description box for the squeezy and the glass sippies that I talked about, as well as the links to resources for like-minded people and helpful groups online. I wanted to also mention that I have a brand new printable GAPS checklist. This is something that I designed to hang on your refrigerator when you're going through the GAPS introduction diet, that just has a really nice outline of what food you're supposed to introduce in what stage. I know that for me it was always like, okay, go back to the book, what am I supposed to add next? Okay, and I thought this would be handy to just have something you can hang on your refrigerator so you know what food to add next. So I came up with something like that, and I have that in the description box below. There's a link to where you can grab it. It's a free printable checklist so you can stick on your refrigerator and know where you're at on the intro diet. So hopefully that makes that a little easier. Okay, this was a super long video. If you stuck with me all the way to the end, that's amazing. If you like this video and did find it helpful, give it a thumbs up. That helps other people find it. Consider sharing this video with anybody who you think might find it helpful. And if you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. I make new videos every week on traditional health wisdom and living a sustainable DIY lifestyle. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.